My co-host today is Dr. Ian Williams, who is an author, sculptor, and a former life sciences leader. Um, Ian is also a friend and colleague for about 3 decades. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you, Gill. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, so thanks for doing this. So this is a different format. I have never tried this. We have never tried this. And so, what I thought we could do is go through emerging news, emerging ideas, and talk about them and debate them. If we fall on the different sides of the topic, that's more interesting. If we
Sure.
fall on the same side, we sort of go into the next one
Right.
pretty quickly. Um, and so I we stay on science, social sciences included, and policy included,
Hmm.
and we won't touch too much on politics because there are so many shows out there catering to that. And so I'm looking here. I picked up side news, and it's interesting topic. So it says here, lab mice seen giving first aid to unconscious mates.
Yes.
Just came out 2 days ago. It says here, in new lab experiments, scientists at the University of Southern California showed that when mice encountered a familiar social partner in a state of unconsciousness caused by anesthesia, they displayed distinct and consistent behaviors towards the partner, escalating from sniffing and grooming to more forceful actions, such as biting the partner's mouth or tongue and pulling its tongue out. Yeah, this is quite interesting. I mean, there's a lot of implications. As you know, there's a huge debate going on consciousness, and a lot of people believe only humans have consciousness. You can do these types of things without consciousness, without being conscious, I would imagine. What do you think?
Well, I absolutely agree. I, I've always felt that the break point for consciousness is the interesting topic. It's very clear to me, and I think as you've implied from these studies, and there are countless other studies, albeit mostly in primates, but also lower species, where there is a clear demonstration of self awareness and consciousness. And I think the interesting question is if you go further and further back in the evolutionary chain, is there some point that it actually develops? A lot of people would argue that inanimate objects have consciousness,
Mm,
and it's a sort of part of quantum theory. It's almost something that can't be articulated or disaggregated currently, but everything has some consciousness by virtue of its actual being, and that has then become more sophisticated as entities have moved up the evolutionary chain. I think an interesting question is whether consciousness confers selective advantage.
mm,
Um, so, for example, do ants, honeybees, other things that exhibit cooperative behavior, is that purely the so-called hive mind behavior, or is
mm,
there actually some consciousness now that is driving them? I'm I'm not sure about that, and I think these
mm.
are very difficult experiments to disaggregate. The mouse experiment's an interesting one.
Yeah.
It could be explicated in a lot of different ways. It could be, for example, mice trying to find out what the issue is, because
Mm.
clearly, if it smells different, it's been poisoned, they quote want to know about it, as opposed to saying, "Oh, Fred's sick. Let me see if I can get him back on his feet," which is a whole different.
So it could be diagnostics
It could be
as opposed to
diagnostic. It could be very
seeking. Yeah.
self-interested. Well, I suppose one could also argue that it would always be self-motivated, in the sense that the if if the injured mouse is not actually a part of that family,
Mm,
then in one sense it's a threat. If it is, then somehow helping it would aid the family. So you have that kind of a
mm,
dichotomy to sort out. It would be interesting if, and I don't know quite what they did because I didn't read this
mhm.
experiment,
Yeah.
Whether if you poisoned a mouse with I don't know something or other that smelt different, would the behavior be different? You know, would they back off or would they try to help it there?
Yeah, I remember another study. This was some time ago. That a mouse that fell into water and another mouse, trying to pull it out of the water, you
Right.
know, almost risking its own life.
Sure.
And so there's a lot of sort of literature and
Yeah.
research around empathy, for
Yes.
instance,
Yes.
and there has been some idea that empathy needs consciousness, and empathy is only for sort of developed biological system. But I suspect we don't know much about that, right?
I would agree. Empathy is a very interesting question because it stems from altruism, as you suggest. Empathy is predicated on a theory of mind, so that an animal seeing another animal in distress puts itself in that position to recognize that distress and then makes a decision to help it. The mot- that's one possibility. The motivation is interesting. So whether altruism really does exist in lower species has been a long and fraught question in biology. And I'm not sure that there is a clear answer to that.
Yeah.
Personally, I feel it's very likely to be the case because a lot of animals, humans especially, our success is predicated by societal interactions. There are very few truly lone animals. And given that, I think it's sort of makes sense intuitively that animals would try to help, um, as I said earlier with mice, animals that aren't threatening them and taking away their food. I mean, there's always intra-species competition going on,
Hmm.
and whether the behavior you just adduced extends outside the particular family, let's say, of the animal. So, for example, and I think perhaps our listeners and viewers will have seen this many times, there are great examples of one I saw recently of a small dog that had dropped into a swimming pool,
Hmm.
and the other family dog was trying desperately to pull it out. Now, is
Yeah.
that because it recognizes it as a family, sees it every day? If it had been a totally unknown dog, would it help it? I'm imagining those experiments have been done, but I'm not aware of them. So it's a different issue there, as to
Hmm.
the motivation. I think with humans, sometimes it's outside pure self-interest, although that's an interesting discussion. For
Hmm.
example, I remember having quite a lengthy argument with somebody who said, Mother Teresa is just a saint, she's this wonderful person. And I sort of took the argument, well, she enjoys it, she likes it. It's just like eating chocolate or whatever, going to the movies. She really
Yes.
gets off on helping people,
Yeah.
as opposed to harming herself or putting herself at risk in order to help people. Very complicated question.
Yeah. That's really interesting. So there's an objective function. So if you and this goes into AI and other areas, but if humans are fundamentally machines and they have an objective function, and part of their objective function could be very systematic, very deterministic, such as maximizing the wealth of the human. Um, some of it could be utilitarian, it could be individual utilitarian, it could be societal utilitarian question. So humans have got, they got very complex brains and it's very noisy in some ways. Uh, and so that is why finding mammals with somewhat smaller brains showing complex thoughts is sort of foreign for us to understand, I think.
Hmm. I think there's a lot of things you said there that um, catch me. First of all, you started by saying humans and machines. Well, let's just hold that for a moment because I think we need to disaggregate that a bit if we're going to use that metaphor. Coming back to the complex behaviors you adduced, for example, so if we start with elephants, clearly intelligent animals, they can recognize themselves in a mirror, they paint, they do a lot of things that we would classify as complex behaviors that indicate self-awareness that aren't, at least on first blush, linked to a utilitarian or, well, to a survival drive. On the
Yeah.
other hand, these animals are in captivity. And so they have keepers, and there's all kinds of interactions that are, quote, not natural. So again, it's very, very hard to look at this. I suppose, I mean, a lot of work has been done on trying to map consciousness.
Mm.
And all that I'm aware of, it maps into huge areas of the brain. I mean, it's not like speech has a Broca's center or
Yeah.
visual,
Yeah.
which has a certain center. And so looking for lighting up in, let's, for one of a shorthand expression, using labeled glucose or whatever, in lower animals and trying to say, yeah, there's an example of consciousness, is a very difficult problem. I'm interested in, I want to come back for a moment when you say humans and machines. What do you mean by that? Why do you say that?
And so, well, I was just making a statement to get your reaction, but uh,
Well, you've
so
got one.
the consciousness and the features of consciousness, let's call empathy is a feature of consciousness, let's say, for argument's sake,
Yeah,
could be a continuum. I think that is what data tells us. So
that's what I would
it
think.
is it is not necessarily a step function change that Homo sapiens sort of picked up, somewhere in African savanna. It is a continuum,
Yeah,
and it has been improving. Um, One could, from a mathematical computing sense, argue that consciousness is an error because consciousness doesn't maximize utility for the individual, I would argue. Um, so it has to be some sort of an error in the, in the evolutionary process, and then you get all these features of consciousness like empathy and all that stuff. It doesn't help you in any way. I mean, if your objective function has a two-factor, two-factor thing, reproduce, get food, why do you need consciousness? I mean, it's very unclear that you need consciousness.
well, a couple of things there. I think I could make an argument that consciousness does enable individuals to be more successful in reproducing. Because
Mm.
by having a theory of mind and understanding mates or competitors'
Yeah,
behavior and being able to predict that and being able to manage that
yeah,
is really quite critical. More so in complex, evolved cultures,
yeah.
perhaps than very early proto-humans, where it was probably still a sort of a fight and flight kind of mechanism.
Mm.
But given in the last, I don't know, probably what, 50,000, maybe 100,000 years, where there is evidence of societies and tribes, I think, again, I come back to the theory of mind as a shorthand of being able to look and observe somebody
Yeah,
and infer or intuit their behaviors and actions confer an enormous advantage, don't you think?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, if I
I think
meet
that,
you on the path in the jungle or on the savannah,
yeah.
to sort out whether you're going to be a threat or an ally is critical to survival. And that is predicated, because most animals will just attack,
Yeah, yeah.
I think, a foreign object.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense, Ian. So that sort of aligns with some of the stuff that I've been reading. Consciousness as an evolutionary survival mechanism. And what you're saying is also very interesting, which is consciousness is sort of a predictive algorithm, predictive for uh, an external entity. So, like your competitor,
Sure.
like something like that, right? So it's a predictive algorithm that allows you to survive better, it seems to me, and hence consciousness would be a natural progression of evolution. And so in that sense, it is, well, let me make a statement and let me let you react to it. In that sense, consciousness, it's a mechanical evolutionary progression, just like arms and legs and, whatever, it is in the sense that it gives you an algorithm that makes you better. Not better necessarily, actually. It makes you survive better. So, in some
Exactly.
sense, it's a risk management mechanism. Let me make this grand statement. It is not utilitarian in the sense that consciousness doesn't really help you, get that next animal and bring it back to the cave. But consciousness is a risk management mechanism that might allow you to survive in critical situations, perhaps. Do you agree with that?
No, I think you're diminishing its potential impact. For example, you just cited it doesn't help you get your lunch. Au contraire. I mean, if the food source is a mammoth, I'm
Yeah.
going to have a very hard time killing a mammoth by myself. So I need to
Yes.
convince Gill, who's busy doing something else, to come and help me get that mammoth. How am I going to do that? Theory of
Yeah.
mind. What does he need? Blah 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 blah. So I mean, immediately, when you start to engage in tasks that
Yeah.
an individual cannot perform, consciousness is a sine qua non. Now, you could say, for example, this gets back to take animals like lions. They will hunt in packs, or a lot of animals hunt in packs
Yeah.
because that's more efficient and effective. But I think that's just pure natural selection working on that.
Mm.
Animals that don't do that starve. Um, so let's come back to consciousness for a moment in the sense of either it is something that evolved and was
Mm.
selected for by external factors, changes occurring in the environment, animals that had consciousness survived better,
Yeah.
or it came along with something else that is
Mm.
absolutely essential. Because you could argue, you just said, or you put out there, consciousness really doesn't, you don't need it. Well, if that's the case, why do we have it? I mean, we spend I told you to do it, everybody does, spends an awful lot of time buzzing around in our brain,
Yeah.
having all these crazy thoughts, consuming huge amounts of fuel. Don't forget the brain consumes over 20% of the energy intake of a human.
Mm.
So a lot of that is buzzing around, wondering, where am I going to get my next date? What is Fred thinking of me? What color wall should I have? All that stuff. If that
Yeah.
doesn't confer some advantage, I would think it would have been selected against.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is clearly selection at work here. Um, what I was unsure of, it's very difficult to say, 100,000, 300,000 years later, how that happened. But it clearly has some advantages. So, as you said, theory of mind. So, if I can predict what you're thinking now, I will be in a good position.
Sure.
And I think most humans can,
Yes.
if they look
Oh,
at
yeah.
each other's faces and eyes,
Right.
they can predict
Yeah.
what they're thinking, right?
Yeah.
And so that would have gotten us, um, so that clan-based conflicts Homo sapiens might have had for 300,000 years. Oh, so let me ask you a sort of loaded question then. Um, it might be that it reinforces clan-based behavior because, so suppose I'm on Amtrak, and I look at somebody and I say, there's nothing that I have an interest in. I sort of move away from that conversation, right? So maybe consciousness and this sort of clan uh, composition, let me call it that way, actually forces you into clan-based behavior all through history. What do you think
Hmm.
about that?
I don't agree on that, but just to use your example. So, I mean, maybe it's a little too trivial or whatever, but okay, so you're in a train and a couple of people are talking and you're just not interested in the subject, right? So you don't engage them, you don't blah, blah, blah. And in so doing, I think your hypothesis is that's pulling you away from a possible widening, and et cetera, et cetera. There are equally well or I could make the argument that someone who's willing to engage in a disparate topic or something outside their tribal or cultural norm stands potentially to gain a huge amount because they're understanding.
Mm.
If you argue that, if you're going to argue that we are tribal in essence,
Yeah.
then all our behavior is to protect and ensure safety of our tribe. And the best way to do that is to understand the threat, always.
Yes.
What has your enemy got in terms of weapons or intent or whatever? Um, and it comes back to something we've discussed, I think, in the past. There are, to my mind, very good data that biologically humans are most effective and accomplished when they're dealing in groups of 150 people.
Yeah.
And looking back on uh, uh, lithic cultures from 100,000 to more years ago, they look to be around 100, 150 people. You know everybody, you can see them. We have this incredible ability as humans to read faces and recognize them.
Mm.
And just the slightest change. You've seen these data where people have videoed interviews, and
Yeah.
watching a video, people can tell within 30 seconds whether the candidate's going to be accepted or not,
Yeah.
simply
Yeah.
by the body language. So we're highly tuned to that, and it confers an enormous selective advantage. So coming back to your thesis that it drives us into tribal behavior, I think we are already hardwired in our genome tribal behavior. You don't look like me, you don't behave like me, you don't dress like me, much as we like buzz around the world and da, 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 da. Fundamentally, you put a selection pressure on somebody, take their
Yeah.
job away, take their family away, man, it's tribal
Mm.
very quickly. And we're seeing that today. And in fact, the internet, if anything, has driven us back into tribal behaviors, I believe.
So I was going to go down the topic, Ian, but I want to ask you another. I want to push on this just a little bit. So um, I can create an AI, quote unquote. I don't like that term at all. Who can look who can look at faces and make a determination. So your example of somebody saying, I can look at this for 30 seconds and I can see if this guy is going to get hired or not. And AI can do that
No.
pretty well with the
Oh, yeah.
current technology, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But my hypothesis is that AI is not intelligent nor conscious. And so those behaviors are basically data driven empirical behaviors that there's nothing special about it. I mean, I would imagine a rabbit or a tiger could do that too, I would imagine.
Well,
Yeah.
come back to the example. You're absolutely right. In fact, it's been done. I think it was done um, looking at uh, pictures of gay men and heterosexual men, self-declared, and an ability to distinguish. And of course, that then raises other kind of issues. But the thing that is different, okay, an AI program can look and make some kind of pre-programmed conclusion about a person's face. If the AI program was then also programmed to say, send a pink slip to everybody who looks like this, that's getting a lot closer, right?
That's
So,
happening. That's already happening, actually.
well, yeah, exactly, it is. So
Yeah.
it's I don't see this discontinuity. I mean, it's just what you program in. So humans are looking,
Mm.
drawing conclusions and making actions. Now, there could be a whole spread of actions, but sometimes people are looking for a particular thing. So let's say you're interviewing somebody, you're looking for competence, honesty, can I get along with them, those kind of things. It's different
Mm.
than am I going to have them as a partner? Are we going to go and play soccer together? I mean, there depends what the outcome is, but you
Mm.
could program that, surely. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, the discontinuity I'm seeing is in consciousness, right? So I fully agree that all of these are programmatic and we can create AI. I I like to call it automation rather than AI because it just
Sure.
doesn't make any sense. Uh, we can create automation to do all of this, but it's not conscious by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, that's a statement that I'm making. So there's something different for that mouse that is trying to save the other one in the water, or the one with anesthesia down on the floor. Um, it is putting data together to make a decision that wasn't familiar to it prior to that one incident, right? So I don't see machines doing that. I mean, machines can be very good at producing language, LLMs, pictures, all sorts of
Let's
things.
just hold that.
Yeah,
That's a very good question. So, all right. So let's indeed suppose that the helping mouse in the experiment you just described had not seen injured mice before, which seems incredible. But just let's assume that's the case.
yeah,
So it then encounters this anesthetized mouse or whatever lying on the cage floor, and it's a new experience for it. So as we started this, innately based upon based on survival drive, it wants to explore that. Okay.
yeah,
And that then causes it to go out. Now the licking, biting, nudging behavior, unless you could directly correlate that with something that truly helped the anesthetized, well, nothing could help an anesthetized mouse, I guess.
mm,
But let's say it had broken its leg or something. If there was something that the aiding mouse did, that would imply a theory of mind, a concern, this for want of a better word, colleague is in pain, what have you. But
yeah,
I think I could imagine that um, the, the disconnect seems to me at the moment. I think we both agree that um, a, a, an algorithm can detect, perhaps better than humans,
mm,
trait that's pre-programmed, right?
yeah, yeah,
Then its behavior in having done that, again, has to be encoded. But so does ours. I mean, a child seeing hot water poured onto a friend learns very quickly that that's
yeah,
not good. And so when it sees that could happen, it
yeah,
acts. If it had never seen that, it was completely naive. I'm not so sure that it would be able to do anything that made any sense.
mm,
I don't know if we're really making me. I suppose I'm just thinking that you could get very close to what is observable human behavior
mm,
by putting in a few more lines of code. So, okay, you detect a difference in these people's faces versus those.
yeah,
And if that's the case, you're going to behave like this. You're going to ask them questions about their honesty. Very simple,
yeah,
right? If they have this eye movement, then again, human previous. Well, let me stop. Sorry. If you took 1,000 people who were employed in an industry and you
mm,
um, got an algorithm to look at all their faces and say, are there any common traits? Are there any links between any of these people? Right. So it will come up
yeah,
with all things, right, based on physiology. Well, it all has to be physical, right? Now, if then you then say, look at the um, performance records of these people. Does
mm,
anything correlate with what you see? And that's a very straightforward algorithm. Just look at the data. Your performance
yeah,
has got 5 stars to 1 star, whatever it is, doesn't matter. Then you say, okay, well, people who, when they're being interviewed, keep shifting their eyes left to right, tend to have poorer performance improvements.
yeah,
Ergo, that if I were to come to you as my boss and say, hey, look, I've looked at all these people, these are shifty eyes, they're no good, we'll get rid of them. I mean, you'd say, oh wow, that's an interesting insight. But I think it's just the question of how much you layer on. So I'm wondering now if you're point about the distinction between AI, or whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
and human intelligence um, is just really a question of how many more program steps you put in there to the action. Some actions are very quick, right? Yeah, he's got shifty eyes. Boom. Or I really like that person. He's got a very nice physiognomy. I think I could marry them and have children and live happily ever after. I mean, there would be levels of sophistication here.
Yeah, I think the distinction between a machine that we currently call AI and a biological system, a mammal, for instance, is consciousness. And so I always argued that there is no AI, quote unquote, without consciousness. Yeah, it's not three lines of code you put in there. No, it's not. It's never going to be three lines of code that you put into the next
How do you know?
GPT or whatever.
Well, it's like the Turing test.
Yeah,
If the experiment we just went through,
yeah.
um, if you were to observe, well, you're so skeptical, but I think for a lot of people, they would be quite impressed. Here's this machine that looks at all the employees
Yes.
and all their performance data and any other kind of data you have on them, physical data, and it draws conclusions that humans couldn't recognize, so they couldn't amass all that very subtle differences.
It's automation. Yeah. I
Well,
mean,
it
we've
is
been using
automation. It is
computers.
automation, but I'm not so sure there's a binary distinction which you seem to be drawing here.
Yeah.
I'm thinking it's a continuum. You know?
I don't think it's a continuum. So this
Yeah,
is a
yeah.
we got a real debate here. So um, I believe all these AI things that are going on will never get to artificial intelligence because if Newton and Einstein and Maxwell were sitting there saying, "Hey, I could do this theory, give me more brain cells," they didn't do that. You know, they just used their own brain cells to come up with something most humans could not. Um, that's what the machines are doing. I mean, give me more silicon, give me more energy, give me more stuff, and at some point I'll figure this out. No, they will never figure this out. Um, it is not a scalable proposition. I mean, it is, we got our silicon mounts in Silicon Valley now. It's using 10% of world's energy production. The estimate is that it's going to use 30% of electricity production around the world in 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is not a technology that is going to be quote unquote intelligent. It will be more automatable. Yeah, I mean, that's great. But at some point, you're going to run out of energy unless we get fusion. So these guys will be all successful if we find an alternative way to generate energy.
Let's
But
not go down that just for a
yeah,
moment. Let's
yeah.
hold your assertion because I'm really interested in this. Um, and so you know what my next question is going to be, and I think it's critical in this kind of a debate and discussion is what is intelligence? Because if
So
you're going to assert that it can't be intelligent, there must be something you have in your mind that it will not be able to achieve. Can you articulate that?
yes, consciousness. So
Oh, so you're saying it's consciousness,
yeah,
which I think
and
is a little different than intelligence.
it is clearly different. I mean, it's different from intelligence as we define it. So we have a whole industry, which is about 20% of the economy now, are running on artificial intelligence. They all believe it's intelligence. So if you come out of, Harvard or Stanford or Northwestern or something, and you say, I have a technology that is AI, you're going to get $100 million.
Hmm.
And none of these guys who are funding these things have any clue what
Yeah, yeah.
AI means,
This
right?
is all a different
Yeah,
issue for a moment
yeah,
because
yeah.
um, I'm more interested in our discussion here. So whether or not venture capitalists understand
Yeah.
AI or AI intelligence or all the bullshit that people say. But just coming back now, which is the critical part of our discussion, I think, is whether machines will be able to achieve. Now, I don't know
Yes.
if you want to change this argument now from intelligence to
Yeah,
consciousness.
so I concretely argue machines, the way that the technology is developing now, it will never accomplish intelligence as we know it because they're not conscious.
So again, I say, what is intelligence? You say consciousness, and that's self-awareness and empathy.
Yeah.
I
So
could program empathy.
no,
I
no.
mean,
So
one could
so let me
program
define
empathy.
it. Let me define it. I think you will never be able to create a Newton or Einstein or Maxwell on silicon,
Hmm.
or even
And
a Gandhi or Nelson Mandela on
well,
silicon.
yeah. Um, so my response, I suppose it's trivial in the sense I'm a firm believer that if the trillion synaptic links in our brain are ever disaggregated, and I don't know if that will ever feasibly be possible, that one could then mimic human behavior. And so the thing, no, hold on just one second. I don't know why not. Say you could.
Yeah,
Well,
I
for
saw a
example,
paper. Yeah.
go ahead.
No, just the complexity, Ian. So this is into the area of theory of complexity, which is I saw sort of one cubic millimeter of a mouse brain completely sort of
Yeah, that's
you
been
know
done. Yeah.
mapped, and it's mind-boggling. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's not like it is. I mean, these are non-linear things. Um, this is not engineering. We are not going to ever model a mouse brain from an engineering perspective. You
Why
know,
not? Why not?
um, well, it doesn't. Biology doesn't work like engineering. It's my, and so
You were just calling humans machines 2 seconds ago. Let me
yes,
just. I think where I see perhaps a difference is surely I understand or can somehow appreciate the enormous complexity. But okay, so there are some phenomenal number of synaptic interactions, all of which, the possibilities become greater than the number of protons in the observable universe or something. But if one had quantum computing, I think it's more of um, a tool failure than it is a conceptual failure, because at least my thesis or my argument is that to know everything is to understand everything. So to be able to look at all of the different interactions that occur in a brain in response to a stimulus, I don't know a priori why that couldn't be done if one had the technology, and the technology could come. And I think if we're looking now, so I just read an article from three of the Google AI gurus talking about their efforts in quantum computing. And so now there are sort of like an 8 qubit computer, phenomenal things it can do. And they're arguing, okay, so it's like fusion, but within a few years, we're not talking hundreds here, of having a serious quantum computer with phenomenal capabilities. Now, who knows what's going to come after that, and after that, and after that? It's like Schumpeter. There was fire, then there's steam, then there's electricity, then there's microchips, and then there's quantum computing. I mean, it gets so fast. So nothing you said, other than just an assertion, makes
yeah,
me
but
understand why you couldn't have a machine capable of intelligent behavior.
yeah. So, but all the stuff that you said from fire to quantum computer is not biological, and so my fundamental argument is that you cannot take a reductionist approach to the brain, and we are going to utterly fail. We're
Why
going to
not?
use all the world's energy to try
You're
to
making
create.
a statement, Gil, but you're not backing it up with data or any kind of a rationale.
Okay, so I mean, it is true that for all the things that you said from fire to quantum computer is biological. That's a true statement. Okay, and we haven't replicated any biological systems yet. So you are also speculating, right? In some sense, that you say, well, at some point there'll be we already have 100 qubit quantum computers from Google and some of the academic centers. 100 qubits. We already have that. You say, well, when it get to 10,000 qubits, that's human. No, it won't be human by any stretch of the imagination. It won't be any biological system, let alone be a mouse.
But you're just saying the same thing, Gil. You're not saying why.
Why? Because we don't know, right? So,
Well,
so,
we
so
don't know. I agree
to
with that. You
assert,
can't say it won't happen just
yeah.
because you don't know.
No, no, but you're asserting scale will ultimately get you there, but
Yes.
you don't know that either.
No, I don't know that
Yeah,
either. But I do think as I look back over history,
yeah.
where scale and speed have changed our capabilities to interact with the world, to achieve things, to understand things phenomenally. And so why would that not occur as things are starting to move exponentially now, not just linearly as they have for 100,000 years?
Yeah.
I
So,
don't
but
know a priori what if you could even suggest something about
yeah.
intelligence that would make it refractory to being able to reproduce it in even with what we know now in terms of um, fundamental particle movement.
So my basic argument is that from fire to quantum computers, none of those things are biological. And a biological system is fundamentally different from an engineering approach, a reductionist approach to building it. And so, you could have more powerful computers. Actually, astrophysics, for instance, all the AI and quantum computing is going to help us find more stuff out there in this universe. That's fantastic. That'll make all astrophysicists more productive. That's awesome. Economists may find better heuristics for resource allocation, valuation. That's also awesome. Um, but but that is not going to get us to consciousness or intelligence is my fundamental argument. Well, I don't have data on the, I mean, it's a speculation, right?
Yes.
Just like your
Yeah, it's an
speculation.
assertion.
It's an assertion.
Let's come back to the biology thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I would argue that quantum computing, electricity, the harnessing of fire is biological. I mean, fire didn't spontaneously by itself figure out how to make steam. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a biological intervention, right? Right?
Yes. Yes.
So it is
Well, I mean, we
biological.
had forest fires and stuff. I mean, it could happen naturally
Well,
also.
yeah, you have forest
Yeah.
fires, but they don't sort of put together a body of water, heat it up, and use it to move a rock. I
Yeah.
mean, that's human, right? And all the way along. So I wouldn't say. But the thing is, so for something that I grew up with, if you take just a simple metabolic process, you swallow
Yes.
glucose and it turns into energy, right? It goes down this pathway. If you start to look at those pathways, initially, it seems pretty straightforward. Glucose goes in, it's phosphorylated, then it's isomerized into this, and it's split into that, and it goes there and ends up in the mitochondria and get ATP. But then you start to look at each of those reactions, and you'll find that the enzymes that catalyze a reaction are
Mm.
themselves also the substrate for an enzyme. And so you get amplification. Just looks like an electrical circuit. And if you have an amplified futile cycle, A going to B and back to A,
Mm.
and there are an enzyme here and an enzyme there, and this one goes at 10 and this one at 8, you get two through. Now, if you then inhibit this 10 enzyme with another enzyme, blah, 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 you can get a huge amplification, right? So that is so, what can I say? It's just basic physics. I mean, you could have programmed that yourself. Now, take that and put it in the brain with 1 trillion cells, okay, you've got some fairly sophisticated capabilities.
Yes, sir. So all you say, so I would argue a human is a brain on a machine, which is all mechanical. And it should shame us by now that we can figure out all the stuff under the brain so well that we could treat all diseases that is not related to the CNS system. And we have figured out, I would argue, nothing about the
Well,
CNS
yeah.
system. Yeah.
So here's a little, I find fascinating series of experiments where subjects were asked, they're shown a red light or some stimulus and asked to raise a hand or press a button when they see it, right? And their brains are being monitored. They move their finger before their brain lights up.
That has been disproven. It's some sort of measurement problem. I think. I mean, there are, yeah,
Well, okay. I wasn't aware of that, and if it
yeah,
is, mea
yeah,
culpa. Okay,
yeah,
but you said the reason why I brought that up is you said the body's a machine with a brain on the top. There are so many somatic examples. So I mean, there's a whole tradition of martial arts and Zen Buddhism is getting something in the muscle, in the
yes.
body. People talk about that all the time. So I'm not convinced that.
No,
Well, I
no.
don't know what.
Yeah, I'm okay with all of that. I think both of us agree that the brain is controlling the body and, signals going back and forth. But my argument was that all the stuff in the body is mechanical. And so why do we have of the eight billion people around the world, half of them running around with type 2 diabetes, and another 20-30% with hypertension? I mean, these things have been easily cured with a mechanical way to approach the body, and we have cured them in some ways. I mean, we just don't have it to all the people around the world. But you go to the brain, there is no disease of the brain that has been cured. None at all. And there has to be a reason for it.
Because it's a highly complex system. If in order for me to raise my hand like this took 8 trillion inputs, I don't think we would have figured out how the hand works. But it's a lot simpler than that. The brain has a huge, I mean, that's the answer. Yeah,
Yeah.
of course, not of course. It is very difficult to treat. I know that you have a cure, but to treat. Oh, well, here's an example. Um, so, as you may know, serotonin has been strongly implicated in anxiety and depression. So aberrantly low levels, blah, 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 hence SSRIs and all that they do or don't do. But there is a cofactor in the metabolism serotonin, which a lot of people lack or have lower levels of. When they're given that cofactor, their depression disappears.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, sort of pretty straightforward and simple, right? So to say that there's been no, I mean, I think you are fond of extreme statements here. There have been certain, the so-called new neuroleptic or schizophrenic drugs. They're by no means curing the disease, but they are helping enormously. But the way I see that is much like somebody chipping flints around a fire 100,000 years ago and figuring out a better way to do it. We are so early in that. But have this discussion in 10 years' time. And again, you just read about, this is what the Google guys would say, okay, they have a vested interest. But using quantum computing to design drugs, I mean, already you can predict the structure of every protein in the body.
I'm not convinced yet. So,
well, I just
remember
don't we
back
have
in
any
my
data
time?
yet. Whether it changes. I mean, I know I would have argued following the sequence of the human genome, we're going to make huge progress. And I
Yes.
did say that because I was in
And
that
and
field.
we were together at a large
Yeah,
pharmaceutical company in
yeah, we
1990,
were. And
and
I
people
was
said
wrong.
all the diseases are going to
Yeah.
be cured in 2 years.
I don't think I ever might have said that, but I was
Yeah.
wrong in my prediction or belief that this would have a major. But what we learned from that is that a dandelion might have 200,000 genes and we have 26,000. Well, it's not the genes; it's the way in which the products of those genes are changed as they are transcribed, which then creates a phenomenally complex system. Biological systems are incredibly redundant, so they have 8 different ways of accomplishing the same thing. you bonk someone on the head, they can't move their arm for 6 weeks, then all of a sudden they can do it. Neurons move around. So I mean, these are very, very complex systems that we just are scratching the surface of. So rather than indicting it now and saying it's not going to be amenable to disaggregation through algorithm and computing power, I think is
Yeah, I
at
mean,
best unknown, at worst naive.
it is unknown, right? So I'm making an emphatic speculation that the brain is not an engineering system. So any engineering approach, including pharmaceutical research and development, quantum computing, whatever,
Right.
two guys won Nobel Prizes by an algorithm for protein folding. There's another guy who won a Nobel Prize for statistical physics. I don't know what that area is. A lot of people are winning Nobel Prizes, but you will not have any effect on brain diseases because that is a disease of a system that is not driven by engineering. And so anytime you take a reductionist approach to it, you're going to fail.
Mm.
That's my statement. I mean, it's my speculation.
Yeah.
I could
I,
be easily
yeah.
surprised. Yeah.
I could live with that as a speculation. And let's start with that. Okay. So let's say, okay, go.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So then perhaps I'm just too limited in my imagination. But so then my first thought is, well, what could it be? So if it's not mechanical if it's not just electrical engineering, right,
Yes. Yes.
with some biology thrown around it to keep things
Yeah.
insulated or whatever, what could it be? Is there some force we don't understand, right, to be discovered? Dark energy, dark matter of the human brain? Could be. I mean, who knew that in the universe? 40 years ago, 50, whatever it was, wasn't known, right? So maybe there's something there, but
It's consciousness. And
yeah.
so till we define what consciousness is, till we get a good handle on how consciousness has evolved, there will be no cure for any any brain-based diseases, I would
Mhm.
argue.
So, okay, fair enough. Let's assume that's correct. So then the challenge is, as it has been since the dawn of human thought, what is consciousness? How can we approach that? How would you approach that?
Yeah, I'm not smart enough, Ian, to do that. Uh,
Well, but
what
no,
I
I mean,
could,
no,
yeah,
I'm being serious, Gil.
yeah,
I think one is okay, if I'm presented with that challenge, and I've thought about that, of course, like
yeah,
everybody else has, one sort of approach starts to do very mechanical things.
yes,
Somebody's got a bullet here, did that affect their consciousness? Somebody's got this genetic mutation, does that affect? You give that person this drug, does that affect that? I mean, these are very mechanical, standard sort of disaggregating type approaches.
yeah,
Or you start to look for detection of some force or some field that's generated
mm,
by these. But proteins are machines. Proteins,
yes,
DNA, they are machines, right? And they work in a sack of fluid that has properties that you can understand. You can make. You can make proteins, DNA, whatever. You can put them. You can make synthetic membranes. You can put them in there. And why then is that not going to be susceptible
mm,
to physical disaggregation to understand it? Because it then must create something. It's like emergence, I suppose. So the phenomenon of emergence, right? You have a city, you bring together a bunch of people, and all of a sudden you've got a Chinese district, and you've got, Silicon Valley. These things emerge that you couldn't predict from the individual inputs.
mm.
Is there a way of looking? Is consciousness an emergent behavior?
I don't know what that means, but so let me go back to what you were asking. So yeah, these are influenceable. I mean, we have drugs for, I mean, not very effective for Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, all sorts of things. I mean, these are mechanical ways we can influence the brain. there's a lot of side effects, as we both know, that clearly implies that we don't quite understand it, but we can sort of tactically make some improvements to it.
Yeah,
I have no problem with that. But ultimately, it comes down to, can you define consciousness?
right.
And if you believe you're conscious, and I believe I'm conscious, and ChatGPT, I can conclusively prove is not conscious. And so the technology track or technology line that that we are on to create quote unquote general artificial intelligence um, is going to spend tens and tens of trillions of dollars speculation and come out empty. But in the process, they're going to use so much energy that we got 8 billion people. Energy is quite important for us. It's not just for Silicon Valley, you know, it's for 8 billion people. So I don't care if ChatGPT gets to consciousness by spending, $100 trillion. It's not that interesting. From a social sense, from policy perspective, I have different motives.
Well, that's a totally different issue. You've gone from saying, what is consciousness, blah, blah, blah. Oh, I don't care if we've got it. The point is it's going to cost
I,
too
I
much to
don't know if
get.
they'll ever get it. My speculation is that they will
But
never get it. Yeah.
well, yeah, yeah. I want to come back to my earlier point. Maybe it's trivial, but I still can't really get away from it. The, the proto Homo sitting around a fire chipping a flint, all right?
Yes.
And now we have a 100-qubit computer, right? So
Yes.
we are now chipping flints with Chat GPT or Claude or any of those things. I mean, they've been around, I mean, we're talking a year, a couple of years, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's nothing, right? And furthermore, the scale, the rate at which things will change and improve. So I just don't think there are data to make that assertion. Now, now you raise a moral question, which is interesting and intriguing, and that is um, the energy consumption taken away from, the 7.99999 billion people who need energy to fuel, making bitcoins is abhorrent.
Hmm.
But I'm not sure people would argue that, well, all the energy that we put into making whatever microchips or whatever has failed humanity. I mean, now we're on much more difficult questions because there's
Yes.
such a separation between the haves and the have-nots, and there are still people in the Sudan and Gaza or whatever starving to death.
Yeah.
But I think generally the world's population is a lot healthier and a lot happier than it was. Maybe not from a tribal point of
Yeah.
view, but certainly in the last few thousands of years.
Yeah. So I haven't thought about this, Ian, deeply. So energy is food. And so, from a societal utilitarian perspective, if we are lacking food, for example, right, then if we have excess energy, we can make food for people. And so, if we had let's say a worldwide sort of utilitarian government or some sort of entity that says, I make so many megawatts hour energy, and I'm going to direct that to this sort of societal utilitarian function. Um, I mean, I'm not advocating it, but I think that that may not be a bad outcome, right? So, well, that is going to push back quote unquote artificial intelligence 100 years. I can live with that.
Mm,
That's a policy question. Yeah.
yeah. Well, my pushback on that would be so. For example, um, something that's not doesn't get a lot of press these days is nitrogen fixation, right? So nitrogen fixation is hugely. I think it's about 5% of the world's energy consumption
Mm.
is in fixing nitrogen for fertilizer for food. Right? The the Haber process and what have you is extremely inefficient. The catalyst is abysmal. But the catalyst is an iron molybdenum, it doesn't matter what it is, it's this molecule that its mechanism has not been able to be understood. And I am firmly of the belief that AI will come up with a better catalyst for that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So there, by pushing forward on that, consuming energy, all the things you just talked about, could, quote, solve the food problem.
It won't because fundamentally you have to couple that with societal constraints, right? So if you solve a problem, the economics of gains of solution accrue to typically about 0.001% of the population.
Yeah.
And so it is not just solving the problem.
That's not true. That's not true. Look at antibiotics. Okay, so antibiotics, when they first came in, just after World War II, very few people got them. Or insulin in 1922, very few people got it, and now pretty much anyone can get it. All right, there are people in dire straits in war-torn countries that don't, but they've largely got it, and so antibiotics have done a phenomenal job. Now, yeah. So
agents for biological systems, I think we have been more moderate in the sense that we have this patent process. So first 18 years nobody gets it. After that, pretty much everybody gets it.
Yeah.
That's not the case in AI or electronics or anything like that.
No, right? Not in that, but the products of that. Maybe. Yeah. That's my point. So if you come up with, I am totally convinced that the threat of drug resistance, antibiotic drug resistance, is huge, as we both know. I am totally convinced we will come up with so many new antibiotics that as a problem will disappear. And that will be driven faster it will be driven by AI, because humans have been trying for a long time to come up with novel antibiotics. It's very difficult. And it's the same. Look at COVID and vaccine technology now. If bird flu hits, we can have vaccines in 6 months instead of 6 years. So.
Yeah, I have no problem with any of that. So,
but that all comes back to, you were making the assertion it's only 0.0005% the benefit. I don't agree.
No. So my argument is more fundamental, which is AI is a technology, is a tool, what we call AI.
Yeah.
Use the tool for whatever good purposes you want to use it. But to argue that this is going to get to human level intelligence is just brain dead. Make a grand statement. And Nobel laureates are arguing it. All the techie bros in Silicon Valley is arguing it. But we have no evidence that the technology path that we are on, what I would call automation, that rest of the world calls artificial intelligence, is ever going to get to intelligence.
We have no evidence, because I don't think.
Yeah. So it's a pure speculation. So I want to go into a completely different topic, Ian. So it says here, Titan may be able to support only minuscule amount of biomass, new modeling studies suggest. So see here, a team of biologists from the United States, Canada, United Kingdom, and France has developed a scenario of what life on Titan, Saturn's largest moon, might look like if it does exist, where it is most likely to occur, and how much of it might be present. And so they're arguing here, if I understand this correctly, that it's not very likely that Titan could support. So we have a few candidates in the solar system. Europa, which is whose moon is it?
I don't know.
Jupiter's moon, and Acidulas is another satellite. So we have a few candidates, and Titan was one of the big hopes that we might find something there. But what these guys are arguing is that the chance of that is very, very low because it just cannot support the organic content. Um, this goes to a larger question, which you and I had talked about and argued before. Um, Given a one instance probability of life, I don't care, what 100 trillion that you're multiplying it with is still not going to get life anywhere else in the universe. I know that you have a different opinion, so let's debate that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, my assumptions or assertions are that, I don't know, within 10 to the minus 32 of a second following the Big Bang, the laws of physics as we understand them came into being. Whether they were there before, I can't speak to. But given that they have existed for 13.5 billion years, and given that we are here as a result of those laws being acting upon the substrate of the universe, then it becomes, for me, a statistical question. Firstly, let's just assume that life as we would define it as being organically based, capable of self-reproduction, and adhering to physical laws. I mean, I don't know what else it would be. That the chance that and I think it is, there are, I think it was 10 to the 50. I was, maybe I think I used Claude or one of the AI programs. I want to know how many stars there were, right? I think it's something like 10 to the 57. I mean, that's a large number.
Seems a bit higher.
Seems a bit high.
Yeah.
But, what's the difference between 10 to 57 and 10 to the 23? Who knows?
Yes,
but
yes.
it's a big number, right? So
Yes.
the chance that out there at some stage, right, not necessarily at this very moment, but at some stage, life, as we just defined it, did not come into being, I find very difficult to believe. So that's what makes me believe. The chance of us finding it by looking a couple of miles down the road of Venus or Titan or wherever is ridiculous. But it's not ridiculous. I mean, it's worth a shot because I think you've got to find it everywhere. I mean, in some form. And whether there is somewhere some prototypical archibacterium that then just gets blasted into space and populates all these places, or it's all arisen independently, which is my personal feeling. But the chance of us finding it is extremely small, but doesn't mean to say that the probability of it existing isn't quite high. Those aren't mutually exclusive.
Yeah, so you mentioned statistics. So if you're a Bayesian, you have to adjust your probabilities after you find something, right? So suppose I say I got life here, Mars looks sort of similar. I go there, so the probability is very high that I find life in Mars.
No,
I
it's
find
not.
nothing there.
No,
So
it's not.
suppose,
Okay.
so then I had to reduce my probability of life occurring somewhere else by a Bayesian method. And I say, I look to Venus clouds, there seems like it producing some gas, should be life there. We find nothing there, let's say. Then I have to reduce the probability even further. Titan, Europa, etc. Yeah, I mean, do all those experiments, but ex ante probability has to be reduced after you find no life.
Well,
This is what NASA doesn't do. Yeah.
yeah, I think I understand your point, but I'm not a Bayesian statistician. But it seems rather to me like, looking for your keys under the lamplight. I mean, by looking at a few satellites in our pathetic little solar system, I don't know, to change your weighting for whether it's 10 to the 23 or 10 to the 27 stars. I think if one had some way, I mean, as I know we humans are desperately trying to do, is to sample, if you like, the universe, and to start with the Milky Way, looking for Earth-like planets and oxygen and all the rest of it. if that was done really comprehensively, and
Mm.
then I think, yes, you could modify. But the very fact that you just happen to pick Mars and Venus and Jupiter, I just don't see the statistical rationale.
No, no, I didn't pick it. NASA said it.
Yeah, okay. So
I
they
didn't
said
pick
what?
it. Yeah.
They said,
And then, says, hey, I'm going to go to Mars. I'm going to find life there. Actually, a NASA scientist said by 2020, there is zero probability that we won't find extraterrestrial life.
yeah.
Actually, they
Well,
should know there is no event with zero probability
I don't know who said
occurrence.
that,
Yeah.
and if he or she were on the program, I'd love to debate that with them. But it
Yeah.
seems a ridiculous assertion. Um, I think one could say that there is a reasonable chance that if, for example, life on Earth was seeded as opposed to developed, that why wouldn't those seeds have fell on everything else in the solar system? So that's a reasonable hypothesis and worth explaining. But the fact, if you go there and it doesn't change the probability for the rest of the universe.
Yeah. So your argument is fundamentally multiply my probability of zero with 10 trillion.
Well,
And
I
in
didn't say,
that case,
I think it's your
you should.
probability zero, not mine. I think it's pretty high. I think it's almost certain that in a period of, well, when the first galaxies, Hubble has just shown, the first galaxies came together that 300 million years after the Big Bang, whatever it was. So let's just say, for sake of argument, in 12 billion years,
5 billion, 5 billion, yeah.
why five?
So the universe is about 14 billion.
Yeah,
The solar system is approximately 5 billion. Yeah.
yeah. No, what I was saying in the whole universe, I'm just saying for the whole
Oh,
universe, from its inception as discrete stars, galaxies around 12 billion or whatever it is, until now, for all of those stars not to have, so if you put aside any kind of mysterious, spiritual, mystical entity,
mm.
just by applying the laws of physics on that number, the fact that it happened here, perhaps another way of explicating this would be to say, did anything happen in the evolution of Earth from a hostile, non-life supporting start to now that is so improbable
No,
that
no.
would be
So we
written
have
like,
evidence that so Earth is 4.5 billion years old. We have
yes,
evidence life originated just 300 million years after the origin of the world. So
yes,
the nasty situations that exist on the Earth had no.
right. In fact, they probably
no
helped. A
yeah,
lot of theory are sulfurous vents in the bottom of the ocean, right? So
yeah.
anoxic, so and that's all to my point, So I just think it. But another interesting question is why we are debating it and why I can let me back off a sec. Yes, it would be fascinating if the seeding hypothesis were true.
Mm.
Okay, by which I mean it came from outer space on asteroids or God knows what, and thereby perhaps
Panspermia, as they call it.
what?
Yeah, panspermia.
Yes, panspermia. If there were evidence of early life forms in our solar system, that is worth looking at because A, we can do it, and B, if we found something, it would be very interesting because it would foster that, right? And assuming it's DNA based, RNA based, whatever, Um, but beyond that, looking for Earth-like planets in other proximal stars, crazy. I mean, it's just a waste of time. And furthermore, what if you find something? You'll be seeing a message that came 50 million light years ago, or some ridiculous time. 50 million years ago, it tends to get here. Just
Yeah, I think this human-centric views is a problematic in the sense that Earth-like planets, great. Follow the water, you'll find life plausible. This is all based on a single observation.
right.
Uh, And we were spending, millions and billions of dollars. Well, not billions, but NASA has a very small budget. So I'm a big proponent of increasing NASA's budget. So don't misunderstand me, but um, these ideas are very engineering-like ideas. Yeah, we have life here, we have water here, we have a rocky planet in the habitable zone, as they call it. So let's go look for water for a rocky planet in a habitable zone. Yeah, that's fine. Suppose you don't find anything after looking for 1,000 times. As a Bayesian, you have to reduce the probability of that is actually true. I mean, this is pure
Well,
mathematics.
let's just hold that for. I'm not disagreeing with. I think it's crazy to waste our money and time doing it, but what you just said. So if you did 1,000 of these, found 1,000 of these planets, right, and then, I mean, all that we can do now with our current technology is look for gases and molecules in the thing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, and if these planets are roughly 4 to 5 billion years old, and given that humans are going to destroy the whole life system on the planet um, pretty soon, so life would have originated for such a small part, and
Yes.
to look at 1,000 and extrapolate that to hundreds of millions again seems crazy.
Oh, so yeah, so there is a time horizon problem here as well. So what you're saying is that life has a horizon.
Yeah,
So it
and
might
that's
have started, and then at some point it's going to go away.
right,
So if we are, sort of aligned from a velocity of light perspective
right.
to look at that particular horizon, you won't find it.
Right, right. Now, I should qualify or take back what I just said because I think bacteria will survive. So I'm again on a very Earth-centric perspective. I think complex life forms could well disappear for a variety of reasons. Certainly humans amongst them, but bacteria, archaebacteria, I think will survive. I mean, and I think I don't see a reason for them to not keep going until the Earth fries up and the sun explodes. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is where AI could potentially help here, actually. So, you could ask, some sort of sophisticated AI algorithm with all the astrophysical data where we might find, I mean, it clearly has human bias.
Yes,
You know, so it's clearly going to look for carbon-based life, and perhaps it can come up with some interesting ideas. Maybe you don't have to be on the, Goldilocks
absolutely.
arena or something. I mean,
Right.
maybe they can come up with a carbon-based life that can sustain high levels of radiation or high levels of temperature or whatever, or low temperature or whatever. Yeah,
So I have a question.
yeah,
So as I'm listening to you speak, I agree with you. So let's say, and I don't think it'll happen today, but you can try it. But a few years, whatever, you ask that question.
yeah,
Okay. So you say, I define life as this, right? Which is not absolutely restricted to the life here on Earth. It's just the ability to reproduce and da, da,
yeah,
and say, come up with various scenarios where that could happen, independent of carbon, oxygen, whatever, or
yeah.
any. And let's say that this program did, and you ask a bunch of NASA scientists or whomever, and they can't come up with anything. Silicon maybe, whatever. Now, that to me, now I think it probably, I suspect it probably could.
Yeah, they are actually doing it. AI has a huge influence on astrophysics right
Right.
now because
Okay.
there's huge amounts of data. We have a lot of questions, and so AI could be a guidance mechanism to reduce the probability of error. And I think they're already doing that. I have some real issues with these one incidence hypotheses: water, rocky planet,
Yeah, sure.
this temperature. I think we're going to lose out on other types of life. I mean, it doesn't have to be even carbon. I mean, silicon has shown properties
Right.
to make life, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
and you cannot get funding for any of those stuff. Yeah. So
Well, yeah, it will be interesting if um, we look at Mars um, crust and Earth and just look at it, and what could we see? I mean, this has already happened. Samples have come back from the moon, I think. I'm a little hazy here, but initially it looks like, or perhaps it was just very early Earth rocks that looked like there were evidence of single cell life, but it turned out to be a geological, whatever. But if we bring back samples from Mars and we start to look at it, I mean, initially we're going to be looking for things like bacteria or some
yeah,
kind of fossil thing or whatever. But if it's something different, we don't know what to
we
look
wouldn't
for.
know. Yeah, we'll miss
So
it.
we would look for some kind of complex architecture that is unlikely to be formed by natural processes. And what that is, I don't know. But,
Yeah, I mean, it goes sort of a broader issue, which is, we're looking for carbon-based life producing certain types of gases, right? So exoplanet exploration right now are the gases we expect to see in a carbon-based environment, and typically on a rocky planet with water, right? Um, I don't know what the right thing is, but it's hugely constraining in many ways. So I mean, if you find it great, but there could be other forms of life that we have no clue about, right? So, but I don't know how we might, one might go to do
I
that.
think the way one would do that is just do a differential. So you look at a
Yeah.
thousand planets and look at the spectroscopy of their atmosphere and look for one that's different from the rest, that has
Yeah.
something in its atmosphere
Yeah.
that by virtue of its unique presence suggests something really unusual happened on that planet. I mean, that for me would be, because I
Yeah.
think if one were looking at Earth and you would see evidence, well, you see evidence of so much, of CO2, of oxygen, of lots of things. But that's the only thing I can think of that doesn't require a, a prejudice or a preconception of what life is. You just look for the difference.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't thought about this yet. And so one could sort of, going back to the AI, you say, suppose that it's silicon-based life. So you're basically replacing silicon for carbon
Yeah.
on what we know. And what would that produce? It's going to be substantially different from carbon-based life and rocky plants and water, right?
Yeah.
Or germanium. I mean, so now we have computing power to say let's substitute
Yeah.
carbon
I'm sure
with
that's
something
been done.
else
I'm sure
and
we could,
see.
with a
Yeah,
few computer
yeah,
clicks, we could find that out. Because, well, the thing that comes to my mind, of course, is, well, energy source, right? You need energy. You need some way of capturing solar or thermal or whatever chemical energy
yeah.
to drive a reproductive process. And so, what would be the equivalent of ATP in that system? Or maybe I'm being too
Yeah, yeah,
constrained.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
exactly. I think
yeah,
that would be and you can model it, you can simulate it
yeah,
with the computing power that we have.
yeah. Yeah,
So,
no, those would be
yeah,
fun. Well, again, it's hard to believe that those aren't really being actively or haven't been actively pursued. But the other thing which I didn't want to sidetrack us on, but you raise the issue of the billions of dollars that are being spent on the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Um, we should be using them for quantum computing, fusion, things that are going to make much more dramatic. Because the question we're asking about extraterrestrial life, we are not competent to ask in a meaningful way. We need to have much better tools. And we should be putting that resource now into getting the
yes.
better tools than trying to do these, frankly, half-assed, speculative, shot in the dark experiments.
Yeah, I fully agree. So it's sort of a horizon or tactical versus strategic question. So
Yes.
it's better to know before you explore, better to know more information
Yes.
before you want to go to explore. On the lighter note, Ian, I would love to spend some time looking for terrestrial intelligence. Uh,
Let me know if you find some.
Excellent. Yeah, this has been great. So I'm hoping that we can do this more often.
Yes, absolutely. I'm really up for it. It's a lot of fun. So, yeah.
Thank
Okay,
you.
good. Great. Bye bye.
Bye.